When my children stole the last tangible pieces of my memory, I did not call them to account for their cruelty. The fog in my mind was already beginning to gather, and I knew I did not have the time to teach them a lesson in anger. So I chose to teach them a final, heartbreaking lesson in love. They believed that by taking my past, they could control my future. They had no idea that in doing so, they were erasing themselves from it completely, leaving me with nothing but the beautiful, tragic ghost of their mother. Before we open this book, please subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments, what is the one memory you would fight to save above all others? My name is Richard Miller, and at 62 years old, my world is beginning to fray at the edges. Here, on my small farm in the quiet green hills of Vermont, my life has been a long, sweet hum, a conversation with the seasons and with my bees. For 40 years, this land was a sanctuary my wife, Helen, and I built together. She was the architect of the wildflower meadows, a riot of clover, aster, and goldenrod that painted the hills in color. I was the keeper of the hives, a quiet custodian of the tens of thousands of lives that turned her flowers into liquid gold. Our life was a partnership, a delicate, interconnected ecosystem of love and labor. Helen has been gone for 2 years now, and the silence she left behind is a constant, quiet ache. But a new, more terrifying silence has begun to creep into my life, the silence of a mind beginning to lose its own story. It started with small things, a forgotten name, a misplaced set of keys. But the fog is growing thicker, the moments of confusion more frequent. My doctor gave it a name, a long clinical term for a slow, inexorable fading. Before she passed, Helen, who knew me better than I knew myself, had prepared for this. She spent the last year of her life creating a gift for me, a legacy of love. She made me 3 memory books. They are not just photo albums. They are beautiful hand-bound scrapbooks, their pages filled with her elegant, looping handwriting. She wrote down the stories of our life, the story of how we met, the day we bought this farm, the births of our 2 children, Daniel and Lavra. She pasted in photographs, ticket stubs, dried flowers from her meadows. On bad days, when the fog is thick, these books are my only anchor. I can sit in my armchair, her words in my ears, her handwriting before my eyes, and I can find my way back to myself. They are the most precious things I own. My children, Daniel and Lavra, are pragmatic and unsentimental. They are city people with busy lives and a clean, minimalist aesthetic that has no room for the beautiful clutter of a life lived. They see my condition not as a tragedy to be faced with love, but as an inconvenience to be managed. Their visits have become less about family and more about assessment. They walk through my home with the cool, appraising highs of inspectors, noting the dust on a bookshelf, the unwashed dish in the sink. "Dad, we're just worried," Laura said last month, her voice a sharp, brittle instrument of concern. "This farm is too much for you now. You need a place where you can be looked after properly." Daniel, always the practical one, would provide the details. He spoke of a high-end memory care facility an hour outside the city, a place he described as a 5-star hotel with medical supervision. They painted a picture of a safe, sterile, and soulless future, a life lived behind a locked door, far from my bees, my meadows, and the ghost of my wife. They did not see that to take me from this land would be to pull a plant from its soil. It would be a final, fatal uprooting. The final, quiet warning that their campaign of concern was about to turn into something far crueler was in their eyes. They would watch me on my bad days, when I would sit with Helen's memory books, tracing the words with my finger, lost in a world they could not enter. They did not watch me with sympathy. They watched me with a kind of clinical frustration. They saw the books not as a comfort, but as an obstacle. They saw my connection to the past as the one thing that was keeping me tethered to my home, the one thing that was standing in the way of their neat, tidy, and expensive solution. They believed my memories were the problem. They had no idea they were about to commit an act of cruelty, so profound, so psychologically violent, that it would not just break my heart, but would sever their own connection to the very past they so desperately wanted to manage. The fog was coming for me, I knew that. But I never imagined that my own children would decide to help it along. The theft was not a robbery in the traditional sense. It was no broken glass, no forced entry. It was a quiet, clinical act of removal, an emotional surgery performed without my consent. It happened on a Tuesday. I had woken up to a particularly bad day, the fog in my mind thick and disorienting. I could not remember what day it was, or if I had eaten breakfast. I went to the small, sun-drenched reading nook, where I always kept the memory books, my hands reaching for the familiar comfort of the worn leather covers. And they were gone. The small table where they always sat was empty, a stark, barren landscape. A wave of pure, disorienting panic washed over me. The books were my map, my compass, and without them, I was utterly, terrifyingly lost. I searched the house in a frantic, stumbling haze, my heart pounding in my chest. I looked in every room, under every piece of furniture, my confusion spiraling into a raw, primal fear. They were not just books, they were my mind, and my mind was missing. I called my son, Daniel, my voice a shaky, desperate whisper. "The books are gone," I said, the words catching in my throat. "Helen's books. I can't find them anywhere." There was a short, almost imperceptible pause on the other end of the line before he spoke. His voice a smooth, practiced performance of concern. "Dad, calm down," he said. "I'm sure you just misplaced them. You know how your memory has been lately. They'll turn up." Lavra called a few minutes later, her voice a mirror of her brother's. "Oh, Dad," she said, her tone a soft, cloying symphony of pity. "You're probably just having a bad day. Did you check the attic? Sometimes you put things in strange places." It was a perfectly coordinated gaslighting. They were using the very condition they were exploiting as the explanation for their crime. They were not just lying to me, they were trying to make me believe I was lying to myself. The turning point, the moment of terrible, lucid clarity, came that evening. I was sitting in my armchair, the empty table beside me a constant mocking reminder of my loss. I felt adrift, a ship without an anchor in a fog-bound sea. And then a memory, a clear, sharp, and blessedly solid memory, broke through the haze. I remembered the day before. It had been a good day, a clear day. I had spent the afternoon with the memory books, reading the story of our first trip to the coast. And I remembered, with a perfect photographic clarity, placing them back on the small table in the reading nook before I went to bed. They had not been misplaced. They had not been put in a strange place. They had been there, and now they were gone. In that single clarifying instant, the fog in my mind burned away, replaced by the cold, hard, and devastating light of the truth. This was not a mystery. This was a betrayal. My own children, my Daniel and my Lara, had come into my home while I was sleeping, and they had stolen the last, most precious pieces of their mother. They had stolen my memories. I understood their cruel logic instantly. They believed that by removing my anchor to the past, they could set me adrift. They thought that without the books to ground me, my confusion would worsen, my lucid days would become fewer, and I would become the helpless, manageable old man they needed me to be, the kind of man who would gratefully sign himself into a sterile beige room and hand them control of his life. My grief was a physical thing, a crushing weight on my chest that made it difficult to breathe. This was not a simple theft of property. This was an act of profound psychological violence. They were trying to accelerate my decline, to push me into the fog, all for the sake of convenience. I did not rage. I did not call them back and scream my accusations. The pain was too deep for anger. It was a cold, quiet, and absolute sorrow. I sat in my silent house, the ghost of my wife all around me, and I made a decision. I could not fight them on their terms. My memory was a failing weapon, but I had one last, powerful thing they could not take from me, my love for Helen, and I would use that love to teach them a final, heartbreaking lesson. My plan began to form, not a plan for revenge, but a plan for a legacy. I would not try to get the books back. I knew they would only hide them better. Instead, I would honor the spirit in which Helen had made them. She had created them to provide comfort in the face of loss. And I would take that gift, the one my own children had so cruelly rejected, and I would give it to the world. They thought that by stealing my memories, they could control my future. They had no idea that I was about to use my remaining lucid moments to create a future they could have never imagined. A future that would leave them with nothing but the empty echoing silence of their own choices. What is the most unforgivable thing one person can do to another? Is it a physical act of harm, or a betrayal of the heart and mind? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. The days that followed my terrible realization were a strange, silent war waged on two fronts. The first front was internal, a desperate, disciplined battle against the encroaching fog in my own mind. I knew my moments of clarity were a finite resource, a precious dwindling currency, and I could not afford to waste a single one. I began to write. I sat at my old wooden desk, the one where Helen used to write her letters, and I filled page after page of a simple, clean notebook. I wrote down everything I could remember, every detail of my plan, every step, every contact. This notebook became my external hard drive, my anchor, a place to return to on the bad days to remind myself of my purpose. The second front was the performance. I had to let my children believe their cruel plan was working. When they would visit, their faces arranged in masks of deep, sorrowful concern, I would play the part of the man they wanted me to be. I would seem more confused, more lost. I would ask the same question twice. I would look at them with a vacant, distant expression. I would allow them to guide me to a chair, to pour me a cup of tea, to treat me like a child. Each act of feigned helplessness was a small, bitter pill, but it was a necessary one. Their belief in my decline was the camouflage I needed to execute my final act. The full, heartbreaking scope of their betrayal was revealed in their conversations. I had left a small voice-activated recorder, a simple device I used to record notes about my bees, in the living room. I would listen to the recordings in my workshop, the place they now dismissed as the dusty, forgotten hobby of a man who had lost his way. Their words were a symphony of cold, pragmatic cruelty. "He seems to be getting worse," I heard Lavra say to Daniel one afternoon, her voice a low, clinical whisper. He asked me who I was this morning. "I think the absence of the books is working. He's becoming more suggestible." "It's for his own good," Daniel replied, his voice full of a hollow, self-serving justification. "He can't be safe here anymore. Another month or two, and he'll be ready. He won't even fight it." They were not just my children. They were zookeepers, observing their specimen, waiting for it to become docile enough to be moved to a new, more convenient enclosure. They spoke of me not with love, but with a chilling managerial detachment. The immediate consequence of hearing their words was the final extinguishing of any hope for their redemption. They were not misguided. They were ruthless. They were not trying to help me. They were trying to manage a problem. And their problem was my lucidity, my connection to my own life. My plan, which had been a seed of an idea, now grew into a detailed and unshakable blueprint. It was a plan not of revenge, but of a profound and tragic reallocation of resources. They had made a judgment. They had decided that my memories were worthless, a sentimental obstacle to a practical solution. I would accept their judgment. I would take the one thing they truly valued, my money, my inheritance, and I would transform it into the very thing they had discarded, memory itself. I contacted my lawyer, an old, trusted friend named David Chun, the son of the lawyer who had handled my father's estate. I met him not in his office, but here, on my farm, on a clear, lucid day. I sat him down at my kitchen table, and I told him everything. I told him about my diagnosis. I told him about Helen's memory books. I told him about the theft, about my children's plan to put me in a facility. I saw the look of quiet, profound anger in his eyes. He was a good man, a man from a generation that still understood the meaning of honor. I then laid out my plan for him. "I want to sell everything, David," I said, my voice calm and firm. "The farm, the equipment, the savings, the investments. I want to liquidate it all." I explained that I wanted to use the entirety of my estate to establish a charitable trust, a foundation with a single, unique, and deeply personal mission. The foundation would be called the Helen Miller Memory Project. Its sole purpose would be to create and distribute, free of charge, memory boxes for families dealing with Alzheimer's and dementia. Each box would be a toolkit for remembering, filled with a beautiful blank scrapbook, archival pens, photo-safe adhesive, and a detailed guide written by experts on how to create a powerful, life-affirming memory book for a loved one. "I want to take the gift my wife gave me," I explained, my voice thick with an emotion I could not hide. "And I want to give it to strangers, because my own children have proven they have no use for it." David listened, his face a mask of quiet contemplation. When I was finished, he simply nodded. "It's the most beautiful and most heartbreaking thing I have ever heard, Richard," he said, "and it will be my honor to make it happen." The final piece of my plan was to write a letter, a final clear-eyed testament to the choice I was making. I wrote it on a good day, the words flowing with a sad, lucid clarity. It was not a letter of anger or of accusation. It was a letter of explanation, a final, quiet lesson in the economy of love and memory. I sealed it in an envelope. This letter and the cold, hard, legal truth of the new foundation would be my children's only inheritance. They had stolen my past. I was about to give away their future. Is a person's legacy defined by what they leave to their family, or by what they give to the world? Share your thoughts in the comments. With my lawyer, David Chun, now acting as the quiet, efficient engine of my final wishes, my plan moved from a conceptual blueprint into a tangible reality. The process was a race against the encroaching fog, a series of deliberate, lucid actions taken on my good days, guided by the notes I had scribbled in my precious notebook on the bad ones. My decision to sell the farm, my sanctuary, was the most painful but most necessary step. I needed to transform the physical world Helen and I had built into a different kind of legacy, a liquid asset that could be poured into the foundation of our new project. David found a buyer, a young, idealistic family from the city who dreamed of starting an organic farm. They did not see the land as a commodity. They saw it as a life. They fell in love with the wildflower meadows, the sturdy old barn, the quiet, humming presence of my bees. They promised to be good custodians, to honor the spirit of the place. Selling to them felt right, a passing of the torch to a new generation who still understood the value of the earth. I signed the papers on a clear Tuesday morning, my hand steady, my mind a calm, quiet pool. The sum was significant, the final, collected value of a lifetime of hard work. The money was not deposited into my regular bank account, an account my children, I now knew, were monitoring. Instead, David created a new temporary holding account, a secure, invisible vessel for the funds that would soon give life to the Helen Miller Memory Project. While the sale of the farm was in motion, David was also busy with the legal architecture of the foundation. He drafted the charter, a beautiful, eloquent document that laid out the mission of the project, to provide resources that would serve as an anchor for those adrift in the fog of memory loss, and as a tool for families to build bridges of love and remembrance. He assembled a board of directors, a small, hand-picked group of compassionate and highly competent people, a neurologist specializing in dementia, a grief counselor, and a retired nonprofit director. They were the guardians I was choosing for my legacy, a family of strangers bound not by blood, but by a shared belief in the profound importance of a single, cherished memory. My children, Daniel and Lavra, remained blissfully, arrogantly unaware of this whirlwind of activity. Their visits continued, their performance of concerned, loving children now honed to a sharp, clinical perfection. They would find me sitting in my increasingly empty house, the furniture tagged with sold stickers, and they saw only what they wanted to see. A confused old man succumbing to the inevitable. A man being gently guided toward the neat, tidy solution of a care facility. "It's for the best, Dad," Lavra would say, her voice a soft, soothing lie as she helped me pack a box of old books. "It will be so much simpler. No more worries." I would just nod, my eyes distant, playing the part of a man whose world was shrinking, while in reality, my world was expanding in a way they could not possibly comprehend. I was not just packing up a house. I was funding a nationwide mission. The final piece of my preparation was a deeply personal and painful one. I had to create the one single thing I would leave for my children. I went to my workshop, the one place that still felt truly mine, and I found a small, beautiful box I had made for Helen years ago from a piece of cherry wood from our own property. It was a simple, elegant thing, its surface polished smooth by the passage of time. Inside this box, I would place their inheritance. I went to the bank and retrieved the 2 items that would go inside. The first was the key to a new safe deposit box, a box where David Chun, upon my instruction, had placed the 3 stolen memory books, which he had quietly and legally recovered from my children's homes under the threat of a lawsuit they could not possibly win. The books were safe now, protected from their careless, cruel hands. The second item was the letter, the one I had written on a clear, lucid day, my final, heartbreaking word to them. I placed the key and the sealed letter inside the cherry wood box. It was a small, light inheritance, almost weightless, but it contained the full, crushing gravity of their choices. The day I moved out of the farmhouse for the last time was a cold, clear day in early winter. The young family who had bought it was there, their faces full of hope and excitement. I handed them the keys to my past and to their future, and I felt a profound sense of peace. My work here was done. I moved into a small, quiet, assisted living apartment in a nearby town, a place of my own choosing, not the one they had selected for me. It was a place where I was still in control. The pieces were all in place. The farm was sold. The money was secured. The foundation was a legal entity. And the small, cherry wood box containing their judgment was sitting on the table in my new, anonymous room, waiting for the day my lawyer would summon them for a final formal reading of my will. A will that would contain none of the things they expected, and one simple, devastating thing they could never have imagined. Before the final act, a question for you. Please hit the like button if you believe that a person's true worth is not in what they own, but in what they create. In the comments below, tell me, is it more important to be remembered or to be loved? The final weeks of my lucid life were a quiet, bittersweet farewell. I lived in my new, small apartment, a place with no history, no ghosts, just a clean, quiet space to prepare for the end of my own story. The fog was rolling in more frequently now, the good days becoming rarer, more precious. On those good days, I worked with David Chun and the new board of the Helen Miller Memory Project. From my small room, we held our first board meeting via video conference. I saw the faces of these compassionate strangers, the neurologist, the grief counselor, the nonprofit director, and I felt a profound sense of rightness. These were the people who would be the custodians of my legacy, a family of the heart, chosen for their empathy and their expertise. They showed me the first prototype of the memory box, a beautiful, simple, and thoughtfully designed kit. It contained a high-quality archival scrapbook, a set of fine-tipped pens with permanent ink, photo-safe adhesive, and the Guide for Families, a gentle, step-by-step manual on how to capture a life. The guide's opening chapter was a story, my story, the story of Helen and her memory books. Seeing her legacy transformed into a tangible gift that would help countless others was the most profound and satisfying moment of my life. My plan was in full motion, a silent, powerful machine working in a world my children knew nothing about. They, in their arrogance, believed they were the ones in control. They would call me at my new apartment, their voices a mixture of relief and condescending pity. "See, Dad?" Lavra said in one call. "Isn't this so much better? No more stress, no more worries. Just letting the professionals take care of everything." "The professionals are wonderful," I replied, the double meaning a secret I held in my own heart. They thought I was talking about the nurses in my facility. I was talking about the board of my foundation. They believed my world had shrunk to the four walls of my small room. They had no idea that my world was now a nationwide project, a mission of memory and love. A final piece of the plan was a meeting David Chun arranged with my children. He summoned them to his office under the pretense of having me sign some final, routine papers for my long-term care plan. They arrived together, looking confident and self-satisfied. They believed this was the final step, a moment they would officially be granted the power of attorney they had so craved. The final legal key to the fortune they believed was waiting for them. I was already in the conference room when they were shown in. It was a good day. The fog was at bay, and my mind was as clear as a Vermont winter morning. David Chun sat at the head of the table, his expression professional and unreadable. The small, polished cherrywood box, their only inheritance, sat in the center of the table. They looked at the box, and at me, their expressions a mixture of confusion and dawning unease. This was not what they had expected. There were no thick legal documents to sign, no financial statements to review. There was just this small, simple, and strangely final-looking box. "Daniel Lavra," David Chun began, his voice calm and formal. "Your father has asked you here today to inform you of some changes he has made to his estate. He has liquidated all of his assets, the farm, his investments, his savings. The total sum has been placed into a new, irrevocable charitable trust." He slid a single sheet of paper across the table to them. It was the founding document of the Helen Miller Memory Project. I watched their faces as they read it. I saw the confusion turn to disbelief, and the disbelief turned to a pure, uncomprehending horror. They looked up from the paper, their eyes wide, their faces pale. They were staring at a future that had just been erased, a fortune that had vanished into a bizarre, sentimental project they could not begin to understand. "What is this?" Daniel stammered, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Where's the money? Where's our inheritance?" I did not answer. I simply pushed the small cherrywood box toward them. "This is your inheritance," I said, my voice quiet and steady. "Everything your father has chosen to leave you is inside that box." Lavra, her hands trembling, reached out and slowly, hesitantly opened the lid. She peered inside. She saw the small brass key. She saw the sealed white envelope. She looked up at me, her eyes a storm of confusion, betrayal, and a dawning, terrible understanding. The trap was sprung. It was not a loud, dramatic explosion, but a quiet, final, and irreversible closing of a door. They had come here expecting to be handed the keys to a kingdom of wealth. Instead, they had been handed a small wooden box containing the full, crushing weight of their own cruelty, and a single final letter from a man they had already, in their own hearts, buried. When a family is torn apart by betrayal, is there ever a way back? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to hit the like button if you believe in the power of a final, meaningful act. Laura's trembling fingers lifted the sealed envelope from the cherrywood box. My name was written on the front in my own familiar handwriting. She looked at it as if it were a ghost. Daniel just stared, his face a mask of pale, slack-jawed disbelief. The slick, confident man who had been so sure of his own cleverness was gone, replaced by a stunned, silent boy who had just been told the world was not, in fact, flat. "Go on," I said softly, my voice devoid of any triumph. "Read it. It's the last thing I will ever have to say to you." With a shared, hesitant glance, they opened the envelope and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. I watched their eyes move across the page, and in the devastating silence of that conference room, I knew they were not just reading words. They were receiving a verdict, a final, irrevocable judgment on their own souls. The letter was not long. "To my children," it began. "If you are reading this, it means my mind has finally surrendered to the fog, and I am no longer the man who raised you. But I am writing this on a clear day, perhaps one of my last, and there are some things you need to know. You are right. My memories were becoming an obstacle. They were an anchor to a past that was preventing you from building the future you wanted for me, and for yourselves. So I have decided to accept your judgment. I have taken the full value of my life, the money you were so concerned about, and I have transformed it into memory itself. The entire estate is now a foundation, the Helen Miller Memory Project, a gift to strangers who, unlike you, still understand the profound value of a single cherished memory. Your inheritance is in this box. It is the key to a bank vault where your mother's memory books are now kept, safe from those who would use them as a tool of cruelty. They will be yours to read after I am gone. Perhaps then you will understand what you have thrown away." I watched as their faces crumpled, the words on the page delivering a blow far more powerful than any angry confrontation could have. The letter had not just informed them of their financial ruin. It had held up a perfect, unsparing mirror to the ugliness of their own actions. But there was one final sentence, one last, quiet, and devastating turn of the knife. I saw Laura's eyes reach the bottom of the page, and I saw a small, strangled sob escape her lips. Daniel just shook his head, a gesture of pure, abject defeat. The final sentence read, "You took my memories of your mother, so I have made sure my memory of you is the last thing to go." The silence that followed was the sound of two hearts breaking under the weight of a truth they could no longer deny. They had not just lost an inheritance. They had lost their place in the story. They had become a memory their father had chosen, in his final lucid act, to try and forget. Daniel finally looked up at me, his eyes swimming with a desperate, pleading grief. "Dad," he whispered, his voice cracking, we're sorry." But the man he was apologizing to was already beginning to fade. The clarity I had held on to so fiercely for this single final moment was beginning to dissipate, the edges of the room blurring, the faces of my children becoming strange and unfamiliar. The stress of the confrontation, the final, massive effort of will, had broken the dam. The fog was rolling in, fast and final. I looked at the two distraught strangers sitting across from me, their faces wet with tears. I felt a flicker of something, a distant echo of a long-forgotten love, but it was a song I could no longer remember the words to. I turned to my lawyer, David Chun, a kind, familiar face in a suddenly strange and confusing world. "David," I said, my voice now a little thin, a little distant, "who are these people? Why are they so sad?" The look of pure, soul-crushing agony that washed over my children's faces was the last thing I saw with any real clarity. It was not an act of revenge. It was a tragedy. It was the final, terrible fulfillment of their own cruel wish. They had wanted a father who was manageable, a father untethered from the past. And now they had him. They had successfully and permanently erased themselves from my mind, leaving me with nothing but the beautiful, tragic, and now untouchable ghost of their mother. Their victory was complete, and it was their life's most devastating loss. When a betrayal is so deep it can never be healed, what is the only true form of justice? Forgiveness, forgetting, or a lesson that can never be unlearned? Hit the subscribe button if this story moved you, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. The conference room was the last place I ever truly saw my children. David Chun told me later that after my question, after I had looked at them with the blank, unrecognizing eyes of a stranger, they simply fell apart. He said Laura let out a sound of such profound, animalistic grief that he would never forget it. He said Daniel just sat there, his face in his hands, rocking back and forth in a silent, private agony. They had gotten exactly what they wanted, a father with no memory of their betrayal. And in that single, horrifying moment, they understood the true, unbearable cost of their victory. David Chun handled everything from that point on. He gently guided me out of the room, leaving them to the wreckage of the lives they had so carefully, so cruelly constructed. The next day, I was settled into the quiet, comfortable memory care facility I had chosen for myself, a place surrounded by gardens, a place where I was not a problem to be managed, but a person to be cared for. My life from that point on was a series of disconnected moments, a string of pearls with the thread broken. There were good days, when a snatch of a song on the radio or the scent of honeysuckle from the garden would bring a flicker of a memory of Helen. And there were bad days, where the world was a fog of unfamiliar faces and strange rooms. My children tried to visit. The nurses told me they came every Sunday, without fail. They would sit with me for an hour in the common room, their faces etched with a permanent, sorrowful guilt. They would try to talk to me, to show me photographs, to spark some flicker of recognition. But the part of my mind that held them was gone, a library wing that had been permanently sealed off. I would look at these two sad, kind strangers, and I would feel nothing but a polite, distant confusion. Their punishment was not a single event, but a life sentence of visiting a man who looked like their father, but who could offer them no recognition, no forgiveness, no release from the prison of their own making. The Helen Miller Memory Project, on the other hand, thrived. It became my only true and lasting legacy. David Chun would visit me, and on my good days, he would show me the letters of gratitude that poured in from all over the country. He would read me stories from families who had used the memory boxes to connect with their loved ones, to build bridges of love across the cruel chasm of dementia. They sent photographs of the beautiful, powerful scrapbooks they had created, each one a testament to a life, a love, a story that would not be forgotten. My wife's final act of love for me had been multiplied 1,000-fold, a beautiful rippling wave of compassion spreading out into the world. I had taken the ugliest act of my children's lives, and had, with one final lucid act of my own, transformed it into the most beautiful act of mine. I passed away peacefully in my sleep 2 years later. David Chun was with me. He said that in my final days, I had been calm and, he believed, happy. After I was gone, he followed my final instructions. He gave the key to the safe deposit box to Daniel and Lavra. They were finally able to open the box and take possession of their mother's memory books. It was their full and final inheritance, the detailed, beautifully rendered story of a family they had broken and a love they had betrayed. They now had the memories, but they had lost the man. And that, I know, was a price far greater than any fortune. My revenge was never about anger. It was about a final, heartbreaking lesson in the economy of the human heart. It was a testament to the fact that a memory is not a thing to be owned or discarded, but a sacred, living thing. And if you are not careful, if you do not tend to it with love and with honor, it can, and will, forget you. That is how I taught my children my final lesson. Thank you for following my story. Please subscribe, hit the like button, and leave a comment telling me about a time when a memory brought you unexpected comfort or strength.